Greetings to everyone and welcome to week number 5 of our spring 2024 semester of Digital Divide. As I mentioned in my announcement, my apologies, not able to join everyone for a Collaborate session this evening. For those of you that did participate that way, as I said, my apologies. So for this week, for February 20th through February 26th, for the discussion and participation points, I need everyone to make sure that you make a minimum of 3 posts between February 20th and 26th. One of those posts should be engaging with your classmates, and definitely try not to make all your posts on one day. I did want to provide a short video just touching on some of the highlights and some of the contents and things we would have talked about if we were together. So use this video as you need to, reference it if it helps your learning. If you don't need it and you're like, hey, I'll pass on watching it, you're certainly fine to do that as well. So this week, we talk about fluidity and stability, right? So there are, changing society and cultural norms, right? And a lot of that change dictates we need to be adaptable. We need to be able to improvise, overcome challenges, right? Resilience is one of the big key words I hear. I don't want it to sound like a buzzword, but it is one of the key words of a skill set that we should be developing. I think regardless of generation, regardless of age, regardless of career choice, right? Things like career changes, moving to new residences, financial matters, medical services, technology has forced us to be adaptive, right? And we talked about this kind of in week 1. Your ability to access financial information via an app or your online banking, medical services, to schedule an appointment, to see your medical records, get prescriptions refilled. The way you purchase a home nowadays, right? Online and scheduling walkthroughs of a house or viewing of a house, the public open houses of homes, that entire industry has changed. And if we think about it, we talk about career changes, and of course, as employees, right, we can work from home. Work looks different. Of course, if our job is structured to work from home, but work can look different in many different industries. But if you think about that from the employer standpoint, especially as you think about, the competition for the best talent that's out there, if people can work remote, have flexible and adaptive work schedules, it broadens the geographic region in which they can go after and compete for talent and recruit talent from. So from an employer standpoint, it has some implications as well. Our authors talked about our personalities, right? Our online engagements, so much of that it reflects our personalities, right? And it can display multiple aspects of our personalities, right? And I say, is it healthy or appropriate, right? Who we display we are online should be true to who we are, right? And I think, very easily could happen, right? Unhealthy fantasy type things. I think our authors talked about that. Certainly people do it to be deceptive, to pose as one person online, but they're really something else. That definitely goes into actually some criminal activity and some pretty serious criminal activity. But even just ourselves, is people and as individuals, and as ourself, if we think about how we, the persona that we take online, is it true to ourselves or is it an idealized version of ourselves, right? So how we present ourselves, I think we should oftentimes challenge ourselves. Like, if I didn't have social media, would this be worthy of sharing? Is this the way I want someone to see me or to perceive me? I always tell people, whether they're younger or career people, I talk to a lot of students, obviously from middle school through college, and the one thing I say is use social media to highlight everything that's great about you, right? We all have wonderful talents, some tremendous gifts to share with each other. So go and share those things. Let us see those types of things that are important about you. Talked about self, right? Self for a long time was viewed as one solitary, right? Before technology, our author talked about this. Self is viewed as a unitary one, right? But technology is bringing to light perhaps that our identity isn't necessarily one, right? Maybe it's multiple but coherent. And I think this goes back to some of the earlier things we talked about, and who you portray yourself on social media. If it's consistent with who you are, right? And you're not portraying a false sense of self, and it is tied to some sense of reality, right? That's good, right? So our self might appear multiple online, right? We might see ourselves in multiple different situations and applying some of our talents in multiple different ways, but it's still coherent, right? It's still a healthy display of maybe the multiple ways in which we engage and interact with other people. But I'd ask you to think about that, right? That technology is bringing to light that perhaps our identity is multiple, but coherent, and what that means to you. That might be a good point of self-reflection for this week, right? And then also we look at, what does self mean when it functions as a society, right? Us in our relation to others, right? And it could be relation to others within our own household, could be within our neighborhood, within our community, within our workplace. But how does our evaluation of self impact the relationship we have with the greater whole? You know, the one author shared this week, and I kind of chuckled, you know, he said he was called Cyberboy, right? And was that perhaps the first example of cyberbullying? And not to make light of cyberbullying, right? I think we talked about that very early on. When something happens, and I'll use a school example for that, when something happens in middle school or high school, right? Before the internet, before social media, right? That event, whatever happened, if it was something either embarrassing or funny or, you know, just the things that happened between students at that age, it ended at school. But now it can follow you 24/7, follow you home, follow you on social media, right? So we need to be aware of that, right? You know, but if we think about it, right, or even revise, right, the stereotypes of those that work in the tech industry, right, and those that work in it, right, we all know what the stereotypes are, and sometimes they're overgeneralizations, sometimes they can be informative, but we should always keep that in the back of our mind, right? Some of those stereotypes that we form about people who work within that tech industry, and whether that's an accurate description or whether it isn't, right? And some of the stereotypes are very positive things, right? Some of the work that some of the people in the tech industry do, we always like having the tech people around because they can work us through some of those problems and hiccups, especially when something crashes, right? So, you know, one of the questions asked, you know, what was your first experience with the internet? You know, what was that like? You know, for some of us, the digital natives, right? Internet functioned just fine. You used some sort of internet browser, had high-speed internet, everything worked great, right? For some of us, it was a very different experience. It was dial-up, it was CompuServe. You had a modem in your house, you know, a modem, and of course, when that modem was tied to a phone line, so if a phone call came in and got kicked off the internet, if you had call waiting, that just complicated things even more, right? But think of what maybe your first experience with the internet is and how it was the same or different from those around you, right? One of our authors, you know, had some pretty powerful opinions, and I always say in this class, your grade and your success is not dependent on agreement or disagreement with the authors or certainly myself. But you know, he had some strong opinions on what the internet ought to be, right? And it's not relevant whether you agree or disagree, but he does make really good observation, and that's that concept of scarcity and abundance. And I've talked about this multiple times, right? The internet and the Internet of Things and all of our smart devices, our phones, our laptops, our smart wearables like our watches and things, all those, right, have made abundant what once was scarce. Information was scarce at one time. Those who possessed information or possessed the ability to mass produce information, right, newspapers, media, those types of things, right, they held all the cards. They held the position of power when information was scarce. Now that information is abundant, right, you know, it's kind of shifted that equation, right? Now you don't necessarily pay for a lot of content, right? You don't pay for a subscription necessarily to a printed newspaper. You might pay for some digital online subscription, right? But we've got much more information at our fingertips, right? And at probably a much reduced cost. So that idea of scarcity and abundance, and that ties through many different aspects of our lives, right? Our own personal mindset, right? If we have a scarcity mindset, we might be overly and maybe at times unhealthily possessive about other things. If we have an abundance mindset, perhaps we realize that a rising tide raises all ships mentality, that if I don't get mine today or my request or my want today, that's okay because I've somehow contributed to our collective success, maybe as a family, as a community, as a workplace. So, you know, reflect upon those concepts of scarcity and abundance and how it intertwines itself through so much of our lives. You know, sometimes I talk about some of the readings, and I intentionally picked this book for this class because some of the readings take us back to as some of this technology was emerging, right? And some of the assertions of our authors this week seem somewhat laughable because we've gone past some of those things and we've answered some of those questions. But, you know, if we think of the technologies that are disruptive, right? They're disruptive for the very reason that they don't fit within the confines of what we believe today, right? They don't fit within, this is how I use this today. Or if you're a business, this is how I make money today, right? Those disruptive technologies exist outside of the context and outside of the confines of definition of what success looks like today, or what an application looks like today, or what sales look like today, or revenue or profit, right? Disruptive innovations are disruptive for that very reason, as they exist outside of the norms that we currently know today. The concept of social currency came up today, right? And I said, is it content or connection or maybe both, right? So Netflix, right? Netflix, very innovative, right? Started a streaming service. They saw what Blockbuster was and like, that's not going to last forever, right? How long are we going to keep that actual copy of a VHS or a DVD, right? Eventually we're going to stream content, right? We're not going to need a physical copy. And of course, Netflix, the thing that Netflix did very smartly a long time ago is they realized that if they were merely an online repository of other people's content, just a digital library of everyone else's content, sooner or later, right, if Netflix was successful, other companies would take their content and start their own streaming services, right? So Netflix realized that their own success, right, especially if it was phenomenal success, could also be a threat, and it was. Because what happened in 2019? Disney took their content from Netflix and Disney started their own streaming service. And you can't blame Disney. They wanted to get the revenues that Netflix was getting from Disney's content. So why not have their own streaming service and use their own content? So Netflix obviously realized, and this is a business strategy lens of which we're viewing these topics, Netflix realized they had to create their own proprietary content, right? That was their ability to be successful going forward, right? So content is things like Disney, Netflix, certainly. Anything on the internet, anytime you search something, you Google something, right? Any smart device gives you some element of content. But then there's also connection, right? Social media, Facebook, Twitter, Snapchat, all those different kind of things. Certainly text messaging, instant messaging gives you the ability to connect with other people very quickly. So it's not content or connection, it's content and connection. And of course, our social currency is ourselves and our demographic profile, and we've talked to some about that, right? And that kind of ties into my next thought. You know, your social currency is your demographic profile. In The Social Dilemma, the Netflix documentary, which is one of the 3 videos or movies you can watch for your midterm, remember that is coming up due. I sent out an announcement about that the last couple of weeks, just keeping that in front of you. But the one issue that they raise in there is that if you're not paying for something, you are the product, right? So as you're browsing online and you're not paying for something, or you're engaging in a website and maybe you think you're receiving something of value, but you're not paying for it, that website is probably gathering data and information on you and probably sharing it with other people, because we don't always read the privacy rights in the small print when we become a user maybe of a platform or some sort of internet-driven technology. But your demographic profile, right, is very valuable. Right? And demographics sometimes paint the broad brush. Sometimes they are generalizations, right? Sometimes even a bit stereotypical, but they do tend to paint a pretty good picture of a large group of people, right? Their purchasing patterns, their eating patterns, their sleep patterns, their travel patterns, right? And if we think of all those things, right, they get monetized in some way. So that is your demographic profile is very valuable to other people. You know, our question for this week was, as an individual, what is your greatest social currency on the internet, right? So as you engage with the Internet of Things, if you engage with smart devices, right, what is your greatest social currency on the internet, right? Where as you engage in all these different places with technology, right, where are you adding value to other people and then receiving value back, right? But your greatest social currency, right, and you can view this through your own lens, right, is how you engage with the other and how you provide value to them, right? All the different platforms and ways in which you may engage with technology. And I would ask, you know, what is your greatest social currency? And I mentioned this, you know, when it comes to social media and our online presence, right? Our reputation is probably the thing that we value the most, right? And that's why we talk about cyber crimes, right? Whether people steal money for us, whether they take our identity and try to steal it and use it for other types of things, a lot of times criminal activity. Our self, our identity and our profile and our reputation probably is one of our greatest social currencies, and we need to protect that. And I think as a society and community, and as we engage with each other, we have to be mindful of how other people might be negatively impacted by things maybe which don't personally affect us, but affect other people, and how we engage on social media and how we engage on the internet and with the Internet of Things, that we are not somehow even inadvertently impacting someone else in a negative way, that we're using it for the best purposes possible. So with that, I'll ask you to reflect upon a few of these topics. Wanted to share some thoughts. Again, I appreciate everyone willing to be flexible. Again, make 3 posts between February 20th and 26th, 3 posts minimum. Have one of those posts engage with your classmates. Spread those posts out over at least more than one day, please. And again, as always, if you have questions, feel free to reach out. Thank you so much.